The morning I got the call about my father's will, I was standing in the parking lot of the hospital where I'd just finished a 12-hour shift as a nurse. I remember the exact moment. My feet ached, my scrubs smelled like antiseptic, and my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. "Miss Carter," the voice said. "This is Daniel Marsh, attorney at law. I represent the estate of your father, Richard Carter. I need you to come to my office as soon as possible." My father had been dead for 4 days. I hadn't cried yet. Not at the funeral, not when I packed up his reading glasses from the nightstand, not even when I found the birthday card he'd written me but never mailed, still sitting in his desk drawer with a stamp on it. I just kept moving, the way I always did. That's what nurses learn to do. You compartmentalize, you function, you fall apart later when there's time. There wasn't time yet. I drove to the attorney's office the next morning, still in the fog that grief wraps around you when you're not ready to feel it. My husband drove me. My husband, Marcus, sat beside me in the car, his hand on my knee, telling me everything was going to be okay. He had that voice he used when he wanted to sound gentle. I used to find it comforting. I used to think I was lucky. The attorney's office was downtown on the 14th floor of a glass building that reflected the gray November sky. Daniel Marsh was a small man with careful eyes and a burgundy tie. He shook my hand, offered me coffee, and got straight to the point. "Your father updated his will 6 weeks before he passed," he said. "He left everything to you, the house in Scottsdale, the investment portfolio, and the business." I blinked. The business? My father had spent 30 years building a medical supply company from nothing. I knew it existed the way you know about something you've always been kept slightly apart from. He'd never talked about it much when I was growing up. My mother left when I was 9, and after that it was just the two of us, and my father worked constantly, and I learned early that his work was what kept the lights on, and I shouldn't ask too many questions about it. "It's worth approximately $38 million, Daniel Marsh said. "Based on the most recent valuation." The room went very quiet. I heard the air conditioning. I heard a phone ringing somewhere down the hall. I heard Marcus make a small sound beside me. Not a word, just a breath, like something had shifted in his chest. "38 million, I repeated. "That's correct. There's also a property in Sedona he purchased 2 years ago, valued at just under $2 million, and a portfolio of investments totaling approximately $4 million. So the full estate is closer to $44 million all told." I don't remember the drive home. I remember sitting in the passenger seat watching the highway blur past, and I remember thinking that my father had never once told me any of this. He lived in a modest house. He drove a 10-year-old truck. He wore the same canvas jacket for 15 years and refused to replace it until the lining tore completely through. I had no idea. I genuinely had no idea. Marcus was quiet the whole drive. That should have been my first signal. Marcus was never quiet. We got home and he made dinner, and we sat at the kitchen table, and he said all the right things. How proud my father must have been of me. How this changed everything, how we needed to be smart about it, how he wanted to help me figure out the next steps. He held my hand across the table. He looked at me with those eyes I had fallen in love with 3 years ago, warm and steady and sure. I went to bed that night feeling something I couldn't name, not happy, not even relieved. Something uneasy, like a thread had been pulled and I couldn't find where it started. I woke up at 2 in the morning. The bed was empty beside me. I could hear Marcus's voice from downstairs, low and careful, the way people talk when they don't want to be heard. I lay still for a moment, telling myself it was nothing. A work call. A friend in a different time zone. I was grieving and exhausted and reading into things. Then I heard him say my sister's name. I have a half-sister, Deanne, from my father's first marriage, before my mother. Diane is 10 years older than me. We were never close. She showed up at the funeral in a black dress with a look on her face I couldn't quite read, and she hugged me and said the right things and left early. I hadn't thought much about it. I got out of bed very slowly. I walked to the top of the stairs in the dark, and I stood there and I listened. She doesn't know anything about running a business, Marcus was saying. She's a nurse. She's going to panic and sell, and whatever she gets won't be anything close to what it's actually worth. If we position this right— A pause. Diane's voice on the other end, too quiet for me to make out words. I know what the attorney said, Marcus continued. But that's just the will. There are other ways. Contested estates, incompetency claims. Look, she's been working 80-hour weeks for 2 years. She's barely sleeping if we document the right things. Another pause. Longer this time. Just trust me, he said. She loves me. She'll do what I tell her to. We just have to be patient. I stood at the top of the stairs in the dark and I did not move for a very long time. Here is what I knew about myself in that moment. I was 31 years old. I had put myself through nursing school working 2 jobs. I had survived 4 years in an ICU and learned to stay calm when everything around me was falling apart. I was not the kind of person who screamed. I was not the kind of person who ran. I was the kind of person who waited until she understood the full picture. I went back to bed. I lay down beside him when he came back upstairs. I closed my eyes. I breathed slowly and evenly, and I started to think. The next morning, I acted exactly the same as always. I made coffee. I asked about his day. I let him kiss me goodbye when he left for work, and the moment his car turned out of the driveway, I called Daniel Marsh. I need to understand everything, I told him. The structure of the business, the accounts, what my father's partner situation was. Everything. Daniel Marsh paused. Is everything all right, Miss Carter? It will be, I said. But I need to understand what I'm actually holding before anyone else touches it. He was thorough and patient, and over the next 2 days I learned things about my father's company I had never known. It was profitable, it was well run. It had 3 long-term contracts with hospital networks across Arizona that weren't going anywhere. It had a general manager named Patricia who had been with the company for 18 years and who, Daniel Marsh told me quietly, had been my father's most trusted employee and had specifically asked to meet with me at my earliest convenience. I met Patricia for coffee that Thursday. She was 60, compact, with the kind of direct gaze that reminded me of the best charge nurses I'd ever worked with. She ordered black coffee and got straight to it. Your father talked about you constantly, she said. He was very proud of you. And he was also worried. About what? About who you'd married. I set down my cup. What do you mean? Your father ran a background check on Marcus about 8 months after your wedding. I don't know what prompted it. He never told me the full details. But he came to me afterward and said he was changing his estate planning and he wanted to make sure the business transfer was structured in a way that was protected. I asked her what she meant by protected. She told me. For about 20 minutes, she told me everything my father had done quietly, carefully, over the last 2 years of his life. He had moved the business into a trust structure that made it very difficult to contest or to force a sale. He had documented everything meticulously. He had also, she said, left a letter for me with Daniel Marsh. A letter I apparently hadn't been given yet because the attorney was instructed to wait until 30 days after the funeral. He wanted to give you time to grieve first, Patricia said. He didn't want you to read it and feel like your whole life had just changed at once. I thought about that. My father, in his canvas jacket, driving his 10-year-old truck, quietly building walls around what he was leaving me, quietly watching, quietly protecting me from something I hadn't even known to worry about yet. I went back to Daniel Marsh that afternoon and asked for the letter. My father's handwriting was the same as it always was, small and precise, the handwriting of a man who measured twice and cut once. He told me he loved me. He told me he was sorry he hadn't been better at saying it out loud, and then he told me what he had found. Marcus had a history. Before me, there had been another woman, older, recently divorced, a moderate inheritance. They'd dated for 2 years. She'd added him to her accounts, and then she'd had what her doctors called a breakdown, a period of severe anxiety, insomnia, confusion, and during that time, almost $300,000 had moved in ways she couldn't explain. By the time she recovered, Marcus was gone and the money was untraceable. No charges were ever filed. There wasn't enough evidence. The woman had moved to another state. My father had found her, he had spoken with her, and he had come home and rewritten his entire estate plan and never said a word to me, because he knew that if he told me, I wouldn't believe him. Not yet. Not while I still loved Marcus. He decided to make sure I was protected first and trust that I would figure out the rest. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the attorney's office, and I read my father's letter 3 times. And then I finally cried. Not for the money, not for the betrayal, not even for the years I'd spent not knowing. I cried because my father had loved me so carefully and so quietly, and I had never had enough time with him, and now he was gone. Then I wiped my face, started the car, and drove to see a different attorney. Her name was Christine, and a colleague at the hospital had mentioned her once as someone who handled complicated family law situations. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with a very calm voice and eyes that missed nothing. I told her everything. I showed her the letter. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "What do you want to happen?" "I want to protect everything my father built," I said, "and I want documentation of whatever Marcus is planning so that it can never happen to anyone else after me." Christine nodded slowly. "That's doable," she said, "but it requires patience, and it requires you to keep acting normal for a while." "I'm a nurse," I told her. "I've been acting normal in the middle of crises for 8 years. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I went home every evening to a man I now understood completely. I watched him with different eyes, the way he asked careful questions about the estate timeline, the way he suggested we consolidate accounts to make things simpler, the way he started making small comments about how overwhelmed I seemed, how much stress I was under, how maybe I should take a leave of absence from work and just rest for a while. I answered him gently and vaguely. I smiled. I let him think everything was moving the way he planned. Meanwhile, Christine was building a file. She connected me with a forensic accountant who documented every financial conversation Marcus initiated. She also, through channels I didn't fully ask about, made contact with the woman from Marcus's past, the one my father had found. She was willing to talk. Diane was trickier. My half-sister had always been a peripheral figure in my life. Someone I sent Christmas cards to and saw at family events and never quite connected with. I hadn't known she resented me. I hadn't known that for years she'd believed my father favored me, that she'd watched me become the sole heir and felt it like something taken from her, that Marcus had found this wound and worked it very deliberately. Christine told me about a recorded call obtained legally, she was careful to specify, in which Diane and Marcus had discussed filing a challenge to the will on the grounds that I was emotionally unstable following my father's death and susceptible to undue influence. The irony of that phrase, coming from Marcus, took my breath away for a moment. I had one conversation with Diane before everything ended. I called her on a Sunday afternoon and I was honest with her. I told her I knew. I told her I wasn't angry. Not at her, not really. Not the way I might have been if I hadn't understood what loneliness and resentment could do to a person over many years. I told her that if she had come to me honestly and told me she felt left out of our father's legacy, I would have found a way to include her. I told her that Marcus had used her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He told me you'd been pulling away from him. He said you'd been different since the funeral and he was worried about you." "He was building a case," I said, "the same way he built one against someone else before me. Did he ever mention a woman named Susan?" Another silence. Longer. "No," she said finally. "He didn't." "I know," I said. "He wouldn't." Diane didn't contest the will. The morning Christine called to tell me everything was in place, I was at the hospital finishing a shift. I stood in the break room with my phone pressed to my ear, still in my scrubs, and Christine walked me through what was going to happen. 2 days later, Marcus sat across from me at our kitchen table and told me he'd been speaking with an attorney about protecting our financial future and that he thought we should start the process of transferring some of the business assets into a joint structure. He had papers. He'd had them prepared, He slid them across the table with a smile that I now understood was not warmth but calculation. I looked at the papers. I looked at him. "I know about Susan," I said. The smile didn't disappear exactly. It just stopped working. Like a machine someone had switched off. "I don't know who I know about the accounts," I said. "I know about the recorded calls. I know what you and my sister planned. I know you ran a background check on me 3 months before our wedding to see what I was worth. I know all of it, Marcus." He was very still. "My father knew too," I said. "He just loved me enough to make sure I'd be okay before you told me." I stood up. Christine was outside in a car. The forensic accountant's full report had already been submitted to the State Financial Crimes Unit. The woman named Susan had given a statement. There was enough. Marcus tried to talk his way out of it the way people do when they realize every door is closed. First reasonable, then pleading, then angry. I didn't stay to watch the last part. I walked outside into the November air and Christine was there, and she handed me a coffee and I stood on my own front steps and breathed for a moment. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. There was no contested settlement because there was nothing for Marcus to negotiate with. The financial crimes investigation took longer, but that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I hired Patricia as my formal business advisor and spent 6 months actually learning what my father had built. I was not a natural businesswoman, but I was a very good learner, and my father, it turned out, had built something solid enough that it could teach me. I kept the house. I went back to work. I still wear my father's birthday card in my coat pocket, the one he wrote but never mailed. I take it out sometimes and read it. Just the last line. "I always knew you'd figure it out. You're the toughest person I know, and I'm your dad, so I'm allowed to say that." I think about what might have happened if I'd never woken up that night. If I'd stayed asleep while Marcus made his quiet plans. If I'd trusted the voice that said everything was fine, everything was safe, the person beside you loves you. But I woke up. I listened. And then I did what I always do. I waited until I understood the full picture. And then I acted. My name is Callie Carter. I am 32 years old. I am a nurse, and apparently now a businesswoman, and the daughter of a man who loved me more carefully than I ever knew. And I am no one's easy target. If you're listening to this and something in your life doesn't feel right, a voice you heard that you're trying to explain away, a paper someone slid across a table a little too smoothly, a kindness that has just enough calculation behind it. Trust that feeling. You don't have to blow everything up all at once. You just have to wake up, stay quiet, and start to look. The truth doesn't hide forever. It just waits for you to be ready. And I hope, wherever he is, my father knows I was ready.